Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world stitched from silk and sand. A place where two ancient empires, separated by thousands of miles, somehow brushed sleeves. Picture this, the Han Dynasty's capital, Chang'an, shimmering under a pale moon, courtyards perfumed with incense, the sound of silk rustling like whispers. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, in the heat-shimmered valleys of Egypt, linen dries under the desert sun, light as breath. And somehow, through caravans, curiosity, and a bit of ancient fashion envy, those two fabrics meet. You probably wouldn't survive the first 10 minutes of this world, honestly. The air is thick with dust and etiquette. If the heat doesn't get you, the rules of bowing will. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments, because somewhere, someone's probably listening to this under the same moon. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing beside the western gate of Chang'an, around 100 BCE. The air hums with life. Donkeys bray, hawkers shout, and the faint scent of sesame oil clings to everything. A caravan has just arrived, its camels draped in red tassels, their bells clinking softly. They've come from places you can barely pronounce. Bactria, Parthia, maybe even farther. The merchants unload bolts of cloth, so fine they shimmer like mist. You reach out and touch one. Not silk, but something cooler, lighter, Egyptian linen. Historians still argue whether these fabrics truly came from Egypt or from some imitation source along the way, but in this sleepy imagining, they did. You watch as a Han merchant holds the fabric up to the sun, squinting. It's so sheer it glows. He rubs it between his fingers and laughs. Good for summer robes, if the emperor allows. You trail him through the markets, each stall louder and more crowded than the last. Bronze mirrors glint from the stalls, polished smooth enough to catch the sky. Somewhere, a storyteller recounts how travelers crossed burning deserts to bring back spices and glassware. You pause by a vendor selling dyed silks, deep crimson, ocean blue, and the pale gold favored by nobles. The merchant beside him displays the new foreign cloth, claiming it's Pharaoh's fabric. He mispronounces the word, but it sticks. A poet nearby mutters that wearing foreign cloth might invite spirits, or worse, criticism from the Ministry of Rights. You can almost hear the bureaucratic sighs echoing through the palace corridors. Still, curiosity spreads faster than propriety. You follow a young nobleman, his robe trailing dust, as he inspects the linen. He frowns, then grins. He says, "It breathes." That's the first compliment the Egyptian fabric receives in China. He orders a bolt for a summer cloak. Behind him, a tailor rolls his eyes. Silk is a status symbol, a national treasure. Linen? That's peasant stuff. Still, money talks louder than fabric snobbery. Later that night, you sit on a low wall outside a tea shop, the moon climbing high. Musicians play softly, plucking at the guqin's silk strings. You overhear gossip from travelers, rumors of a land beyond Parthia where rivers flood like clockwork, and people wrap their kings like gifts when they die. You sip your tea, which tastes faintly of dust and jasmine, and imagine Egyptian workers along the Nile, weaving linen in cool stone workshops, unaware their handiwork will one day catch the eye of a Han courtier half a world away. Historians still argue whether Egyptian linen truly reached Han markets through direct trade or through a long chain of middlemen. Some say the climate and distance made it impossible. Others point to records of exotic goods, tortoiseshell from India, frankincense from Arabia, and glass beads likely from the Mediterranean. So really, what's a few rolls of linen between empires? As the night deepens, you wander back toward the gates. The guards lean on their spears, half asleep. In your mind, you trace the journey backwards, across the Pamirs, through Persia, past the Red Sea ports, and into the heart of Egypt. Somewhere along that endless trail, hands exchanged fabric for gold, stories for spices. The air cools. You glance once more at the bolt of linen folded in your arms. It smells faintly of smoke and sun. Two worlds folded into one cloth. You imagine the Egyptian weaver humming as she worked, never guessing that her creation would one day catch the eye of a Han courtier half a world away. And in that moment, as the torches flicker and the city settles into its nocturnal rhythm, you realize that history isn't just written, it's worn. Threads carry whispers, and every hem hides a map. You brush your fingers across the linen again, the texture both alien and familiar, and you can almost hear the desert wind inside it. You wake with the dawn, still in Chang'an, and the city hums like a loom beginning its day. From every direction comes the murmur of trade, the bray of camels, the jangle of harness bells, the soft rhythmic clap of sandal soles on dust. You follow the noise through the West Market, where the Silk Road empties its treasures into China like a vast river of curiosity. It's here, between the scent of cumin and the shimmer of bronze, that the threads of two empires truly cross. Merchants from Persia, Parthia, and India lean over counters, arguing in half a dozen languages about weight, weave, and worth. Somewhere, under a sun-bleached awning, a bolt of foreign cloth glows faintly gold. You reach out. It's that same linen again, the one the noble admired last night. Cool against your fingertips. A texture so different from the softness of silk that your mind immediately starts comparing. Silk whispers, linen breathes. Historians still argue whether these meetings ever happened quite like this, whether Egyptian goods truly traveled so far, or if Egyptian became a kind of brand name passed along the road to make things sound exotic. But in this slow-paced dream, you can see the process unfold as clearly as camel tracks in dust. A merchant from Syria sells a batch of linen to a trader from Sogdia. The Sogdian adds a story about the Nile to boost the price, and by the time it reaches Han China, it's the cloth of the sun gods. You watch one caravan master unroll his maps, thin strips of painted silk, tracing routes that stretch across entire continents. He gestures at oases you've never heard of, each a bead on the necklace of the Silk Road. At every stop he says there's tea to be swapped for incense, jade for glass, silk for linen. You nod, pretending you understand, but really you're just entranced by the idea that every thread of clothing might carry the memory of another person, another land. The market crowd swells. A man selling frankincense shouts that his goods smell like heaven itself. Next to him, a woman hawks turquoise beads from the western deserts. You catch a whiff of roasted sesame, and your stomach growls. It's been a long morning of imaginary time travel. Someone jests that you could trade a single Han silk robe for enough linen to wrap a minor pharaoh. You chuckle quietly. Not bad, considering silk takes weeks to spin and weave. The road, though, isn't kind to these merchants. You imagine the journey in reverse. Linen packed tightly into camel saddlebags, crossing mountains where snow crunches like broken porcelain, then through deserts where the stars burn so fiercely that travelers swear they can hear them. Traders sing to keep their spirits up, half prayer, half lullaby. One fringe tale says the first bolts of linen came not from trade, but from shipwreck. Supposedly, a vessel from an Egyptian port drifted east after a storm, its cargo washing ashore somewhere near India. There, local weavers studied the cloth, copying its weave before passing the idea further along the trade routes. Historians roll their eyes at this, of course, but it's the kind of myth that fits perfectly in the half-light of history, where fact and fancy weave together seamlessly. Back in Chang'an, the linen's fame spreads faster than the dust from passing carts. Artisans want to know how it's made, alchemists want to know what plant yields such a fiber, and poets, always the poets, want to touch it so they can write about clothes that carry the coolness of moonlight. You smile. Marketing hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. A middle-aged silk merchant scowls as he watches the crowd gather around the new fabric. "Foreign threads," he mutters, "snare foolish hearts." Still, he strokes the linen's edge and quietly orders a sample for himself. You catch him later comparing the weave to his own silks, mumbling about how it might blend well for export robes. As the sun climbs, the air thickens with heat and bargaining. Somewhere near the gate, a scribe sits under a parasol documenting trade taxes. You glance over his shoulder, rows of neat characters listing cloths of the West of unknown make. That phrase will later puzzle historians. Was that unknown code for Egyptian, Persian, or simply an admission that even the empire's bureaucrats couldn't keep up with the world's imagination? By noon, the merchants pack up. The linen rolls are carried off towards tailors and aristocrats who fancy a new look. You walk beside one of them, following a cart laden with goods down the road lined with parasol trees. The air smells of resin and horse sweat. You find yourself thinking about how strange it is that something as simple as fabric can carry so many worlds within its threads. Back at the caravanserai, the traders settle down for their midday rest. You sit beside them, sipping tepid tea, listening to stories drift through the air like dust motes. One man insists he once saw the pyramids, mountains built by ghosts, he calls them. Another claims the Nile floods because the gods weep every summer. The others laugh, but secretly they all want to believe. You do too. As the day fades and shadows stretch long, the road outside Chang'an glows faintly golden in the dying light. Somewhere down that winding route lies the source of all these rumors, a land of palm trees, linen looms, and kings wrapped in eternity. You don't know yet how much of it is true, but the sound of trade, of voices mingling, feels like the heartbeat of connection itself. The caravan leader you met earlier looks at the horizon and sighs. Silk for linen, jade for glass, word for word. Every trade is a kind of story, he says. You nod, realizing he's right. And as the last rays of sunlight catch on the bolts of linen stacked beside the wall, they shimmer like a promise. You step through a lacquered doorway into a noble's chamber, the inner world of Han fashion, where formality and elegance dictate every movement. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Even the servants glide like ghosts. Sunlight filters through bamboo blinds, striping the room in gold. On a low stand lies a robe folded with mathematical precision, every crease deliberate, every corner aligned to invisible laws of hierarchy. Here, clothing isn't just clothing, it's identity, status, philosophy. The Han wardrobe is a soft armor of etiquette, woven to display exactly how important or how humble you are. Robes for the court, robes for rituals, robes for lounging while pretending not to care about politics. Silk, naturally, is everywhere. It gleams faintly even in the shade, as if moonlight had been captured and tamed. You watch a young attendant lift a sleeve. It ripples like water, then falls perfectly still. "Don't wrinkle the phoenix embroidery," her mistress warns, half amused, half serious. The noblewoman herself is preparing for a banquet, surrounded by combs, ribbons, and an air of gentle anxiety. Historians still argue whether Han clothing codes were stricter for women or men, though both seem exhausting. Rank determined everything: the color of your robe, the height of your belt knot, even how many layers you could wear without looking ridiculous. You think about your own wardrobe, probably less stressful unless you count laundry day. The Han robe, or Shen Yi, is a masterpiece of geometry. One long piece of fabric, folded and wrapped around the body without a single cut. The seams are like whispers, barely there, yet perfectly balanced. The idea is cosmic harmony. Heaven is round, earth is square, and your outfit should somehow reconcile the two. No pressure. A servant brings in a bolt of the new linen, rumored to come from the far west. The noblewoman's eyes widen. "Too light," she says first, but her fingers linger on it anyway. You can tell she's intrigued. Silk, for all its beauty, can suffocate in the summer heat. Linen, foreign, breezy, suspiciously practical, feels like rebellion in thread form.
You watch as her tailor unfurls it, testing the weave against the light. "For underlayers, perhaps," he murmurs. "No one would see." But of course, someone always would. Fashion secrets never stay secret long, especially in palaces. The room fills with the soft murmur of fabric talk, warp and weft, dye and durability. Someone mentions that foreign weavers use wooden combs instead of bone, and their looms stand upright rather than flat. You imagine the linen stretching across such a loom, light catching it like river water. A scholar sitting nearby raises an eyebrow. "Imported cloth," he says in that tone only bureaucrats have mastered, "may bring imported ideas." You smirk quietly. There's always that one guy in every era who fears trends more than plagues. To lighten the mood, a jester, a minor entertainer allowed at noble gatherings, shuffles in wearing mismatched robes of silk and linen. "See," he grins, "I bring balance to yin and yang." The noblewoman covers her smile with a fan. Even ancient aristocrats appreciate a decent dad joke. You follow the tailor as he begins to cut. Every snip of his bronze scissors feels ceremonial. He lines up the fabric on a wooden table, using cords to measure perfect symmetry. His assistant hums softly, perhaps the same tune his grandmother hummed while weaving. The air smells faintly of incense and mulberry bark. Outside, the cicadas drone, a natural metronome marking the slow rhythm of the Han day. The heat presses against the shutters. You can almost feel why this linen would tempt anyone. Silk glues itself to the skin in weather like this. Linen sighs and lets go. The noblewoman nods. "We'll test it for comfort," she decides. "In the garden this evening." Later, you find yourself in that garden. Lotus blossoms drifting in the pond, frogs croaking in lazy harmony. She appears, wearing the experiment, a hybrid robe of silk and linen, gold embroidery along the cuffs, a daring touch of foreign simplicity beneath. The effect is striking but subtle, like rebellion wrapped in etiquette. Her maid whispers that the cloth was traded through countries of heat and sand, and that it's blessed against sweat. You bite back a laugh. The first ancient marketing claim for moisture-wicking fabric, apparently. Still, as you watch her walk beneath the moonlight, the robe moving like water, you sense something important. This isn't just about comfort or novelty, it's about connection. In that moment, one empire breathes through another's cloth. You can feel the Nile and the Yangtze merging quietly in her sleeves. The scholar from earlier watches too, pretending not to be impressed. "Foreign trends come and go," he says, fanning himself. "Silk is eternal." You glance at his sweat-drenched collar and decide he's mostly saying that to save face. And somewhere beyond the walls, the caravans are already moving again. More linen, more stories, more proof that fashion always travels faster than politics. You leave the garden, the sound of silk and linen brushing together behind you, soft as a sigh. The night deepens, warm and slow. You can't help thinking that every robe here, every careful fold, isn't just fabric, but philosophy, stitched with the threads of a world both proudly local and quietly global.
Morning again, this time quieter. Chang'an is still rubbing its eyes. You're standing outside the study of a minor historian who moonlights as a gossip collector. He's leaning over a scroll, trying to explain to his skeptical assistant how Egyptian fashion ever became a topic of debate in the Han capital. "It starts with rumor," he sighs, "and rumor always travels faster than trade." The rumor begins with tales of the Nile, that distant river said to rise and fall like breath itself. Word spreads of linen garments so fine they could wrap kings for eternity and still not decay. Some claim Egyptian priests wore robes that shimmered with divine light. Others say they were just really good at starching. Either way, the Han elite are intrigued. You stroll through the marketplace again, where storytellers now sell fragments of Egypt the way vendors sell figs and dates. In the land of sand and pyramids, one croons, people wear the breath of gods. You chuckle. Clearly, someone's been over-marketing their textiles again. Historians still argue whether anyone in Han China actually knew where Egypt was. Most maps of the time blurred anything west of India into a vague concept of Dai Qin, the great empire beyond mountains and mirages. Yet somehow, through half-remembered whispers and embroidered retellings, the allure of linen found its way east. A poet you meet at a tea house swears that linen has moonlight woven in. He gestures dramatically with his fan, nearly tipping over your cup. You decide not to correct him. In truth, Han poets adore anything that lets them compare fabric to nature. Silk becomes water, linen becomes air. You half expect someone to write an ode comparing socks to philosophical enlightenment next. Still, there's something magnetic about the myth. You imagine a nobleman reclining in his summer garden, half listening to lute music, wondering what it would feel like to wear the same fabric as an ancient Egyptian priest. Maybe it's not about the cloth at all, but about touching a legend, about wrapping yourself in a story that once belonged to gods. You wander through the palace corridor later that week, and you can sense the quiet ripple of fascination spreading among the court. Someone's cousin claims to have seen desert robes embroidered with lapis-colored thread. Someone else swears they've been gifted sandals woven from papyrus reeds. You can't help picturing a Han minister trying to walk in Egyptian sandals, tripping over his own dignity before the emperor. By afternoon, a diplomatic envoy arrives from the western regions, his robes a mix of styles. He bows deeply, presenting gifts, small alabaster vials of perfume, amulets shaped like scarabs, and yes, fine linen. The court gasps softly. The emperor lifts an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. Silk, after all, is the pride of China. Allowing foreign cloth into the palace borders on heresy, but curiosity, like the desert wind, is hard to contain. You watch the eunuchs carry the linen away for inspection. It said that one of the Empress's attendants secretly kept a small piece for herself, folding it into her pillow. "To dream of the lands where it came from," she whispered. You smile at that. Even the most powerful people can be sentimental about faraway mysteries. Later, as twilight seeps through the windows, you find yourself standing before a map drawn on silk. Thin black lines stretch across the world like threads, some broken, some looping, all uncertain. The scholar beside you traces a finger toward the westernmost edges. "Here," he says, "beyond Parthia and the great deserts, they say there's a river that overflows each year. Perhaps that's where this cloth is born." You imagine caravans trudging beside that river, their footprints mirrored centuries later by the traders you met in Chang'an. The connection feels fragile, yet profound. The Han see the world as a cosmic web, everything linked, from heaven's stars to a robe's hem. So maybe it makes sense that a thread could travel halfway around the earth and find meaning in a stranger's wardrobe. Outside, the night air smells of lotus and charcoal. You hear someone singing, a merchant, drunk on profit and nostalgia. The tune sounds oddly Mediterranean, though you can't place it. His lyrics drift through the dark, the cloth that cools the sun, the robe that humbles kings. You grin. It's catchy in a sleepy way. And just as you're about to leave, a palace servant passes by, carrying a scroll filled with sketches, strange figures in triangular skirts and tall crowns.
Imported drawings, she explains, part of a trade shipment. They say it's from a land where cats are sacred. You nod thoughtfully. Maybe that's where the linen came from. Historians still debate how much Egypt and China knew of each other in those distant centuries. Some claim faint records exist. Chinese mentions of Lijiang, perhaps Rome or Alexandria by another name. Others say the link is romantic invention, the sort of historical mirage travelers love to tell around fires. But tonight, standing in that perfumed corridor, you let the myth live. After all, every rumor starts as a longing for connection. The stars rise over Chang'an, silver and soft. You picture the same stars hanging over the Nile, reflected in its dark water. Two civilizations staring up at the same sky, unaware that their threads are already tangled in the loom of history. You breathe deeply, feeling the slow rhythm of both worlds merge, the whisper of silk, the sigh of linen, and realize you're already wrapped in their story.
You're back in the weaving district of Luoyang, the air vibrating with the sound of looms. The rhythmic clack-clack is hypnotic, almost musical. Threads stretch across bamboo frames like golden harp strings, and the smell of fresh-dyed silk mixes with the sharp tang of boiled mulberry leaves. Here, the Han textile workshops are less like factories and more like cathedrals of patience. Today, though, there's a quiet rebellion underway. The weavers have received a sample of that foreign cloth, Egyptian linen supposedly, and they can't stop poking at it. You lean over a wooden frame as a woman in a faded headscarf runs her fingers along the fabric's edge. "Strange," she murmurs. "It breathes differently." She holds it to her cheek, closes her eyes, and smiles. Feels like night air. Historians still argue whether Han artisans truly got their hands on authentic Egyptian linen, but the fascination was real. Textile workshops recorded attempts to replicate the weave, some even experimenting with a mix of silk and rami, the closest local substitute. You can almost see the trial and error happening in real time, threads breaking, apprentices sneezing in clouds of dust, someone muttering about too many fibers, not enough fortune. At one loom, a young craftsman has tied a piece of the foreign fabric beside his own work for comparison. He squints, tongue between his teeth, and says, "Their weave is tighter, but the threads are rougher, like a clever but impatient student." You laugh softly. Artisans have always been equal parts critic and admirer. The workshop master, a wiry man with calloused hands, shakes his head. "We can't sell this," he grumbles. "No shimmer, no soul." Yet even he can't resist testing the material's resilience, twisting and tugging, nodding slowly. "Still," he admits, "it would make fine summer bedding." You catch the faintest glint of practicality in his eyes, the universal gateway drug of innovation. As the afternoon light tilts through the rafters, the weavers' conversations turn speculative. What sort of people make this fabric? Are their looms built of gold? Do their rivers truly flood by command of the gods? One woman jokes that maybe their thread comes from the hair of mummies, then snickers at her own daring. A few apprentices laugh too hard, like they're not sure if it's okay. You can't help but smile. Workplace humor hasn't evolved much in 2 millennia. In the corner, a scholar sent by the Bureau of Textiles scribbles notes on a bamboo slip. He mutters phrases like unfamiliar weft ratio and remarkable breathability, occasionally wiping sweat from his brow. Historians will argue about this someday, you think, then realize you're technically fulfilling that prophecy. He pauses to lecture a weaver who's trying to imitate the foreign pattern by eye. No, he insists. You must measure the gaps, not the threads. She rolls her eyes and mutters something about scholars who've never held a shuttle. You suppress a chuckle. In every age, theory and practice weave an awkward partnership.
Outside, the river hums under the bridge, carrying dye runoff in faint rainbows. You dip your hand in, the water cool and slippery, and wonder how many colors from this stream will end up in garments that travel halfway across the empire. Maybe even to the capital again, woven not of Egyptian linen, but of Chinese curiosity. Back inside, the master unveils his newest experiment, a bolt of cloth blending silk for shine and rami for breathability. He calls it the summer silk, a compromise between pride and practicality. You can tell he's not sure whether he's inventing or imitating, but either way, the result is beautiful. A young apprentice tilts her head. "Do we tell the nobles it's foreign or local?" she asks. The master grins, missing a tooth. "Tell them it's expensive," he says. You laugh out loud this time, earning a few curious glances. You wander through the rows of looms as the sky darkens, each rhythm merging into a collective heartbeat. The scene feels both ancient and strangely modern. Innovation born from imitation, inspiration dressed as competition. Somewhere, perhaps, Egyptian weavers are doing the same thing, wondering what distant hands will one day touch their cloth. A final observation drifts from the scholar's lips. The soul of a fabric lies not in its origin, but in its comfort. You watch him jot it down, smug like he's just coined philosophy. Still, he's right. Every thread here, foreign or not, is spun with the same desire, to make life a little softer, a little more bearable under the weight of summer heat and human expectation. As the weavers finish for the night, the looms slow to silence. You can still hear the faint clicking in your head, like a lullaby made of wood and patience. The workshop empties, leaving behind the scent of dye and ambition. A single bolt of cloth lies folded on the table, the experimental blend, pale and perfect in the lamplight. You reach out, brushing your fingers over it, and it feels right. Not Egyptian, not Chinese, just human. And as you step outside, the stars have begun to shimmer over Luoyang. Their light falls like threads across the rooftops, sewing the city into the night. You imagine those stars stretching westward, all the way to the Nile, connecting two worlds through invisible strands of curiosity and craft. Somewhere, you think, the first breeze of summer slips through an open window, fluttering the edge of a robe woven from both silk and wonder.
Evening again, and you find yourself walking along the edge of the imperial compound, where the lanterns are already glowing, a trail of tiny suns suspended in the warm dusk. The courtyard smells faintly of lotus and roasted millet. A banquet is beginning, though tonight it's not just about politics or poetry, it's about fashion diplomacy, the Han version of a red carpet event. Silk rustles everywhere, like the whisper of waves. The nobles have gathered to greet envoys from distant lands, Parthians, Sogdians, maybe even one or two who claim to have glimpsed the edge of the Egyptian world. You linger near a stone column, trying not to look too impressed, but the spectacle is undeniable. The air feels heavy with perfume and pride. The music begins, slow, deliberate. Flutes, zithers, and soft drums that sound like polite thunder. Servants glide among the guests, refilling cups of plum wine that shimmer like melted amber. At the far end of the hall sits the emperor himself, impassive, almost bored, but observant. This is where silk and linen begin their quiet duel for prestige. Historians still argue whether such fashion exchanges actually took place during Han diplomatic feasts, but written records mention foreign envoys presenting cloths of light texture and strange scent, which is exactly how you'd describe imported linen after a long camel ride. The court chroniclers, of course, downplayed it. No empire likes to admit it's curious about someone else's wardrobe. A hush falls over the crowd as one envoy steps forward. His robe is unlike anything the Han have seen. Layers of cream-colored linen, cut differently,
belted at the waist, simple yet striking. The texture catches the lamplight with a matte glow, softer than silk's shine. You can almost feel the ripple of fascination spread through the hall. The interpreter bows, explaining that this fabric comes from a land where the river blesses the soil every year. A murmur passes among the scholars, some intrigued, others skeptical. You catch one court lady whispering, "Imagine not wearing silk in summer. Imagine being comfortable." Her fan flutters faster, betraying her interest. At the banquet table, you notice a young minister studying the envoy's robe more closely than the dishes before him. "Breathable," he mutters, perhaps forgetting that that's not the kind of compliment one makes at a royal feast. Another noble smirks, saying silk has divine origins, gift of the silkworm goddess. And linen, he asks, gift of sand? The table chuckles, but you notice even he fingers the edge of his collar as if reconsidering its comfort level. The emperor's chief tailor, seated nearby, is making mental sketches. You can see it in the way his eyes follow the folds, the way his fingers twitch like invisible scissors. He's thinking, how could this fabric be adapted without offending tradition? A tricky balance, innovation disguised as homage. A small procession of dancers begins to move through the hall, their sleeves fluttering like banners. Each costume tells a story of trade, Persian patterns on Chinese silk, Indian embroidery imitated by local hands, and now, for the finale, a robe inspired by that foreign linen. It's not real Egyptian fabric, but the court tailor's best interpretation. The crowd gasps softly. You can tell it's a diplomatic maneuver as much as a fashion experiment, a message of openness wrapped in elegance. The emperor nods once, barely perceptible, but enough to send the signal. Tomorrow, every tailor in the city will whisper about the linen robe that impressed the throne. As the feast continues, laughter flows more freely. A few nobles dared to joke that perhaps silk and linen should marry and produce a perfect child, cool, smooth, and entirely unaffordable. You grin into your cup. If only they knew they'd just described the future of luxury textiles. Later, when most guests are tipsy, the Parthian envoy tells a story about how Egyptian priests believed linen purified the body and kept demons away. A Han scholar counters that silk connects the wearer to celestial order. You can sense the competitive politeness sharpening into philosophical sparring. Perhaps, you suggest quietly to yourself, they're both right in their own languages. Out in the corridor, away from the noise, you overhear two handmaidens discussing the envoy's robe. So plain, yet it moves like a cloud, one says. The other nods. Our silk blinds you. That one soothes you. You wonder if that's the real secret of fashion diplomacy. Not who looks richer, but who looks more at ease. Before the night ends, the emperor retires. The guests bow low as he disappears behind a silk curtain, leaving the hall to chatter and gossip. The musicians switch to a softer tune, something wistful. You step outside, where the moon hangs over the roofs like a polished pearl. A faint breeze stirs, lifting the edge of your sleeve. You imagine that same wind traveling westward, brushing over deserts, palm groves, and the cool ripples of the Nile. Somewhere out there, another feast might be happening. A banquet under the Egyptian stars, where someone runs their fingers over imported silk from the mysterious East. You smile at the symmetry of it all. Two civilizations comparing fabrics, each convinced their own is superior, yet both quietly longing for the other's mystery. Fashion, after all, is just diplomacy you can wear. The lanterns flicker lower, the conversations fade, and the garden beyond the walls hums with crickets. You let yourself breathe, the night air carrying traces of wine and jasmine. Somewhere between silk and linen, luxury and comfort, self and stranger, the world feels small enough to fit inside a single thread.
The next morning rises warm and honey-colored, and the palace air feels thick with the perfume of gossip. You wander through the inner courtyards, past lacquered gates and koi ponds, toward the women's quarters. It's quieter here. No clanging armor, no officials arguing about tariffs, just the soft hush of silk brushing over polished tiles. Today's intrigue doesn't involve military maneuvers or treaties. It's about veils. Gauzy, delicate veils, inspired by the ones the Egyptian envoy's companions wore last night. Court ladies, ever attuned to subtle shifts in taste, have taken notice. You can already hear the whispers drifting down the corridors like incense smoke. The Empress herself is trying one. Inside her private dressing chamber, the Empress sits before a bronze mirror polished to near perfection. A handmaiden gently lifts a thin veil, woven from the finest silk but imitating linen's airy lightness. It drapes over her hair, softening her face until she looks less like a ruler and more like a painting come alive. You, standing just at the edge of the threshold, feel the hush that falls over the room.